Hi everyone, it's Bryony. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's highly requested video. Why on earth I chose to become a single mother by choice at 24 using a sperm donor. By far my most asked question on my channel by people who have never seen me before, who maybe haven't followed along on my Journey to Solo Motherhood series that I did. This is the question I get asked all the time. Why on earth did you choose to become a single mother on your own so young? And the truth is there's no one thing that made me come to the decision to do this. There are many factors that led me to make this choice. And so today I figured would be the perfect opportunity to sit down and go through all of them, or at least as many of them as I can remember right now, and get it out there to explain how I came to make this decision. We've got a lot to get through in this video, so let's jump right on in. So the first thing you need to know about me is that I love children and I've always wanted to have them. For as long as I can remember, I've known I wanted to become a mum. And so for me, when it came to making a decision about having kids, it was never a question of if I want them, it was always a matter of when and in what situation. The next thing that was a factor for me in making the decision was something significant that happened to me when I was a teenager. In my mid-teens, I contracted something called Lyme disease. It's a particularly nasty bacterial infection, which basically just attacked many different parts of my body. We didn't know what it was at the time. We knew I was getting very sick. I was always exhausted, had no energy to do anything. I was initially diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and it took a couple of years to find the right doctor who eventually did the correct type of blood test that I needed and was able to diagnose this infection. However, the consequence of that infection was that I became so ill I ended up dropping out of school and ended up starting my YouTube channel and a small business, and everything that kind of led off from there. That's not really the main part of what made me become a solo mum, but the critical part about that is because I became so sick I had to leave school. That essentially ripped me off what I call the life staircase. There is, at least in the Western world, this kind of generally accepted staircase of life, as I like to think of it. So essentially you're born, you go to nursery, school, college, university maybe, you get a job, you meet someone, settle down, get married, buy a house, have kids, not necessarily in that order, you're building your career, and then eventually you get to a point where the kids leave home, you retire, go off travelling and die. At its most basic, that is the staircase of life. When you experience something that kind of rips you off that, and in my case it was getting Lyme disease, I think it makes you question that staircase more so, like the traditional way of doing things. Because you're just kind of going along with your life, doing the same things as everyone else, and then suddenly something, in my case it was illness, rips you off it, throws you on the floor and makes you think, oh, hang on a second, where do I go from here? And the truth is there's many different pathways to life, but that staircase is the one that only ever seems to really be shown in media or in our movies, and everything that we read and see, like that is how things tend to work. And so when you are growing up, that's what you expect is going to happen, and it can often have to take something quite significant to make you snap out of that way of thinking and go, hang on, maybe there are other ways of doing everything that I thought I had to do in this order. And that's one of the reasons why, even though it was obviously an awful time for me being that ill, I'm now able to look back and feel a lot of gratitude around experiencing that, because having Lyme disease allowed me to have to expand my ideas of what I wanted my life to look like and how I was going to structure things, and be able to think outside the box and plan things differently, and maybe things that are more tailored to the way that I want to live my life. So being ripped off that life staircase at a reasonably young age was something that I definitely think has had an influence in how I made this decision to become a solo mum, because as I said before, it's something that enabled me to open my mind more to new ideas. So it's something that I think is a significant factor in how I ended up coming to this decision. The next kind of key stage in my life that led me to making this decision was actually two things that happened to me when I was 20 years old. One was I found out that I had a condition called adenomyosis, and the other thing is I figured out that I was on the asexual spectrum. Adenomyosis is a condition that affects your uterus. It is kind of like the sister or the cousin to the more commonly known endometriosis. Essentially, the lining of my uterus has grown into the muscular walls, making my periods very painful, but it does also have an impact on your fertility over time. When I was diagnosed at 20, I asked my gynecologist if it would have an impact on my fertility, and he was quite good actually, because he was very open and honest with me and saying it probably won't have an impact on your fertility right now, but this is a progressive disease for which there is currently no cure. There are only treatments to manage it, and so as you get older it will probably get progressively worse and become harder for you to get pregnant. And also women who have adenomyosis often end up having a hysterectomy somewhere down the line. So that was something that made me really start to think about, actually at some point I'm going to have to really seriously consider when I want to have kids and how that's going to look for me, which leads me to the other thing that I figured out at 20, which is being on the asexual spectrum. I spent a lot of my teens feeling quite different, I think, from my peers in terms of things like dating and everything around that, because I just really wasn't that interested in it, and also I just didn't find that many people attractive. I think for a long time I kind of felt like something was just different about me, or not necessarily wrong. I don't think I ever felt something was wrong with me, but I just felt like maybe I'm a bit of a late bloomer, or just something was a bit different. However, at 20, I first heard the term asexuality, and in particular grey sexual, and I was like, oh my god, that is me. I actually now identify somewhere between like the grey sexual, demisexual space. So I tend to just use asexuality as the umbrella term, which is what some people use it for. Grey sexual is part of the asexuality spectrum. Asexual, demisexual, quasi-sexual. There's a lot of different sexualities in there. I actually now feel like I identify somewhere between the grey sexual, demisexual space. But asexuality just means people who experience no or very little sexual attraction, and it can also be used as an umbrella term for that whole spectrum. So 20 ended up being quite a key time for me, because I figured out these two pretty critical bits of information. One is that my fertility clock is ticking a bit faster than it is maybe for some other people. And the other is that I'm not actually that interested in dating anyone. So if I want to have kids, I'm going to have to start thinking about doing this a little bit differently. So I think 20 is a pretty fundamental time that my mindset shifted. And although I was already aware of people having children via sperm donation and women having children on their own this way, I think that's the time where I started to really think, maybe I should look into this in more detail. And then at 21, I made the decision that I wanted to become a foster carer. I had always been interested in looking after children, and I'd known about fostering for quite some time because I'm an only child, and initially when I was younger, I had tried to persuade my parents to maybe foster so that I would have sort of like a half sibling at home. They weren't interested in it, but it did open my mind to the world of fostering. And so as I got older, I started to think, maybe that's something I could do. And so at 21, I applied to one of the local authorities that's near me, and they said that they'd be happy to take me through that process. So I ended up going through that, and I was approved just after my 22nd birthday. When I went into fostering, I think this is something that, initially at least, I was thinking would be something I'd do for quite some time. I thought I'd be one of those foster carers that could potentially do it for decades, like some of the foster carers I knew. However, I very quickly became aware of all the issues with the system and just how difficult it really was to foster in the current climate. Maybe specifically things to do with my own local authority, but I just came up against issue after issue, and so began to realise that actually this wasn't something I was going to be doing for a long time, at least not with that local authority. I did debate moving to maybe another local authority or an agency further down the line, but I knew that I wasn't going to be fostering with my current local authority for a long period of time because there were just so many issues that it was just not a pleasant thing to do, which is a shame because I loved looking after the children. The children were amazing, but dealing with everything else around that was just making me miserable. So I think that was also another important factor in my decision, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to foster for a long time, and so that kind of meant that that way of family building was something that I was able to kind of strike off my list because it just wasn't the right fit for me. So throughout this time period between 20 and 24 when I made the decision, and obviously I'm fostering in this time as well, every now and then I'm kind of going back and looking at the HFEA's website, which is the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Association that we have in the UK, which has some really good information about sperm donors, conception, and everything that works around that. And so I was doing more and more research and coming back to this website more and more and looking at it, and just every so often wanting to kind of keep looking at how this might work, considering, do I think this is the right thing for me? And that's just what I did for a couple of years, basically. Then we get to September 2021, a couple of months after my 24th birthday, actually less than 2 months after my 24th birthday. There was just one day where I was lying in bed. I had a foster child next to me. I was fostering a newborn at the time. I remember that quite vividly. And I was looking on the HFEO website at sperm donation, and just something went off in my head. It was like a light bulb moment where I went, I want to do this. And that was the moment where I made the decision, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to have a baby on my own using a sperm donor. And again, linking back to that whole like being pulled off the staircase early on part, there are many moments in life where you have to take a leap or take a risk. And I think having been forcefully pulled off and had to do that before makes it easier to do this. And also you're aware that sometimes things in life happen that are just unpredictable. And there are these moments where sometimes you just have to go, fuck it, let's do this. And this for me was one of those moments where I really did just say, I want to do this. I've been looking at this for a while, this feels right for me, we're going to go for it. And then we get to the planning stage. After I'd made the decision that I wanted to become a solo mum, I basically had to decide when that was going to be and figure out the finances of how I was going to do that. It wasn't as simple as being like, okay, I want to do this, let's go ahead and do this now. I had to think a little bit more practically about timing, finances, and everything else that's involved with when you decide to have a child. So in terms of like the finance and the career side of things, I was actually at a point in my life where I'd kind of reached a crossroads, because I knew that I didn't want to continue on with fostering, but I thought I might do it for maybe another couple of years because I really loved looking after the kids. And I was like, how long can I bear the system? I also knew that when it came to my business, that I had run it for quite some time. I wasn't as interested in it as I had been when I first started it up. I didn't have the passion for it that I originally did. And when you're a sole trader, like, you are the main driving force behind it. And so I'd kind of let it, plateau for a while. And I knew I wanted to get it to its 10th birthday, which ended up being May this year. But after that, I was going to shut it down because I just didn't have the same drive for it that I used to. And actually, it was taking up a lot of my mental energy, because there's a lot of things involved with running a small business that you have to do. And so I knew that was something I was going to be shutting down at some point in the near future. And then also YouTube, which at that point in time was barely any of my income, to be honest, because I just let it really slide. Again, most of my focus at that point in time had been on fostering and looking after the children. And when you foster, you're paid an allowance for the children while you're fostering. You're not paid an allowance while you're not fostering, but it's virtually impossible to do anything else at the same time, because fostering, local authorities basically want you to be there full-time for the children. They're not allowed to go into childcare. But this is in the UK, I have to say, it's different in other parts of the world. Not allowed to go into childcare. They want you to be available for meetings like all the time throughout the work week. You have to have meetings with your social worker, with the child social worker. You have to do ongoing training. You have to write reports. You have to do meetings and medical reviews. There's so much that is involved that I always say that fostering was like a full-time job. Not so much because of the kids, but because of all the other stuff you had to do around it. That made it really difficult. And also because you can have times where you'd have children, but when you didn't have children, you'd have no form of income from fostering, so you'd have to rely on your other forms of income, and you didn't know how long that period was going to be. It could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 6 months. So it was very difficult to plan financially while I was fostering. And so I knew that when I stopped fostering, that I'd be moving over to my other two forms of income, which are my business and my YouTube channel. And I had always planned to kind of share like my journey and everything on YouTube throughout that time. I also had some savings, so I thought that I would probably be okay. And I hoped that the content that I would be doing would be sort of more advertiser friendly, but I hadn't factored in just how much more advertiser friendly parenting and kind of all that content about pregnancy and stuff actually was. So I ended up doing better off with that, which allowed me to be more confident in shutting the business down when it hit its 10-year birthday. If it hadn't been as good, I might have maybe kept it going another year or two, but I decided that actually I was going to be fine relying on this as my main source of income. And so I was able to shut the business down when it reached its 10th anniversary. And I have actually been really enjoying making this new content. And even though it's not the same as my old one, and I will still be making stuff around like menstruation and sustainable period products and everything like that. But the other really good thing about being a content creator is it is actually a pretty flexible form of work. There's no set time or day that I have to work. It's just whenever I had like childcare for my son, because my mum very kindly looks after him for me while I do this. And so I knew it would be something that would probably work quite well around having a child. It had worked reasonably well around fostering. It was more the stress of like dealing with the system and stuff that had made it more challenging before. So I had some kind of idea that I thought this would work. And even though I knew we weren't going to be rolling in money, I thought we would be successful enough that I'd be able to get by living a simple life with my son, and that was all I really was aiming for. I also knew that going off and starting a new career would mean that I'd probably have to spend at least a couple of years kind of getting established in that career and getting to a place where I felt like I was comfortable having a child and that I'd be able to manage it in terms of like finances with childcare and everything going back. And, you know, because childcare is very expensive in the UK. So actually, when I really sat down and thought about it, in some ways this was not a great time to have a baby, but in some ways it actually was a really good time, because it was this transitionary period between one way that I had lived my life into a new period where in the future I definitely do want to go off and I think find a new career and a new path myself. I'm always someone that loves to kind of do new things and be constantly challenging myself. I don't want to be stuck doing the same thing for the rest of my life. So that is something I'm very much looking forward to, but I think that's something that's further down the line, and it felt like right now was a time to focus on kind of like having my children and really spending time with them. And that's what this channel allows me to do. So thank you very much if you are somebody that watches me regularly. The other thing that was really important during this planning stage was to have a conversation with my parents, because like I said before, my mum does the childcare for Oren while I'm working today, like filming, and I knew that there was absolutely no way I could do this if my parents weren't on board. I am very, very privileged. I have a really close relationship with my parents. They live quite close to me. They're a major support network for me, so I knew that in order for me to do this, this was something they had to be on board with as well. And I had a pretty good idea that they were, because I had discussed kind of like over the years, mentioned that I thought that at some point I might have a baby with a sperm donor, particularly as they obviously noticed I wasn't really that interested in dating or meeting anybody. And they obviously knew that I really love kids and had always wanted them, and they had been a great support for me while I was fostering as well. And I had a pretty good idea that they wanted to be grandparents too. So I was essentially able to have a conversation with them where I went, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Realistically, this is the only way I'm going to be able to have children, so if you want to be grandparents, this is kind of how it's going to have to work, so let me know if you're on board with that. Didn't quite put it like that, but you know, I first had a conversation with my mom and said this is where I was thinking and I really wanted to do this, and I kind of saved this conversation for a holiday we had in Scotland, and I was like, you know, this will be the time to tell her I want to have a baby, and I thought she'd be like, oh my goodness, wow, but actually, like, she wasn't shocked at all. So yeah, I was kind of like, oh, I had this like big announcement to make, and it's sort of like not as big a deal as I thought, but in some ways it was good because it meant that she was obviously on board with it. And then I had a conversation with my dad a couple of months later, as again I was still doing more research in this time, and said this is what I was thinking, and he was very supportive too. And at that point in time, I think I'd made the decision to wait until my 25th birthday before going to start treatment. But once I'd had the go-ahead from both my parents, I decided, like, why am I waiting? Like, I really want to do this. I don't know how I'm going to be able to wait until I'm, like, 25 for this. Why not do this now? There's nothing special that happens at 25. Let's do it a bit sooner. So that's actually how I ended up coming to the decision to start treatment sooner than I had originally planned. The other part of the planning stage for me was doing a lot of research into donor conception. It was really important to me that for the sake of any child that I had researched this as much as I could, and I was making the decisions that they would feel most happy and comfortable with if I was successful in having a baby this way. And so I was doing a lot of online research, looking at the opinions of people who are donor conceived and things that people who had had donor conceived children was saying about it, and, you know, kind of the tips and tricks for raising a child who is donor conceived, because that was something that was very important to me. I didn't want to go into this blind. So those, I think, were the key parts for me of the planning stage, was working out how I was going to do things financially, setting up my life in such a way that I cut back as many expenses as I possibly could. So for example, I had a car that was currently being paid off at the time, and I decided to save as much money as I could to pay it off a year early, which I did. So that freed up some finances for me too. Also enabled me to kind of spend more time focusing on my YouTube channel and building up that audience again and that interest. And also focusing on my business too. So it was just kind of like a really important time for me, was getting everything in order and planning out how this was in reality going to work, and making sure I had the support network set up in order to do that. Because the biggest thing to understand about solo parenthood is you can never truly do this alone. You either need family to support you, or you need people that you pay to support you, so nannies or childcare, etc., babysitters. Having some form of backup support for those times where you need it is critical. So I knew, again, from fostering, this had taught me, I knew I needed that in place. So making sure I had those conversations with my family, making sure they were happy with this and they were happy to support me with this, that was a critical part of the planning. So now we get to the really nice part, how I feel now that my son Oren is here. So if you want to follow along with the whole journey and like from starting treatment, how it worked and how I decided on the sperm donor, etc., I've actually filmed a series on that called My Journey to Solo Motherhood. There's 8 episodes in the series. You can go and find it on my channel and watch it. I'll also try and remember to link it down below. But I'm not going to cover that in this video because, like I said, I've filmed a whole series on it, so you can go and watch that separately. But as I film this video, my son Oren is now 6 months. And honestly, like, I feel like I made the best decision of my life. Even though my pregnancy was really, really tough, fortunately, once Oren was born, I have just felt amazing. I cannot put into words how it feels to be a mother at last. Like, there are some days where I genuinely just don't believe it. I just like think, oh my God, like, I actually did this. Like, I knew I wanted to, and I went ahead and I fucking did it. And like when I see my son and he's, you know, giggling or smiling, I just think, oh my goodness, like it was 100% worth it. I feel so happy. I've always wanted to be a mother, like I said in the beginning of the video, and to actually be here and to do it in a way that I think was right for me and worked for me just feels incredible. I definitely don't feel like I made this decision too early at all. Like I said, it was something I kind of had been considering since my late teens, early 20s. Gradually did more and more research into it, came to the decision that this was right for me, and then did more planning and figuring out the finances and everything. And there was a certain amount of a leap of faith when I did this, but it was something I knew I wanted to do. I knew it was the right time for me, and I knew I felt physically, mentally, financially, emotionally ready, as much as I think you possibly can. The truth is there's never a perfect time to have a baby. There's better and worse times, but there's never a perfect time. And so for me, it felt like this was a time I could make work for me, and I have done. Since my son Oren has been born, there has never been a moment where I've regretted doing this. It has always been like a feeling of, oh my God, you know, he's actually here now. Like this baby that I've kind of imagined for so long having, what it would feel like to be a mum, to carry a child, to give birth. All of that, like the carrying and giving birth bit was not at all what I thought it would be like or planned like when I was younger. It was miserable, most of it. Birth was amazing, but the pregnancy, oh my God, horrific. But actually having here and having a child that I could look into his eyes, and like Oren has a lot of features very similar to me. He has my dark eyes, he has my kind of facial layout. So seeing him and being like, wow, like we shared DNA, like I actually grew you. It's just, for me, it's incredible, like honestly incredible. And in terms of like my hopes and wishes for the future, I really just hope that I can be a good mum, that I can raise my son in a way where he grows up knowing that he is always going to be loved unconditionally, no matter who he is or what he does, that home with me will always be a safe place for him, and that I will support him on whatever journey he takes through life, and also in any of his opinions about being donor conceived. It's important that, you know, that is part of his heritage, part of his identity, and however important or unimportant he feels it is, I will fully support him in that. I think we can often look at the world and see a lot of the negative things that are going on, particularly with the media and with how news and things are presented in today's world. But actually, there is some kind of magic to looking back at our history and at our ancestors. And I've always been interested in history, and I think looking back at like the ancient Egyptians and seeing what we were capable of as humans back then, and looking back at this sort of 200 to 300 year old chain of human existence, and by having a child I've created another link in that chain, and who knows how long that chain will go on to. And I also think there's something particularly magical about being able to look up at the stars when it's dark and look up there knowing that we're seeing like the exact same layout pretty much that all our ancestors have, and that there are so many unique events that led to human life forming on Earth, and that we might potentially be the only conscious beings in the whole universe, the only people that are able to stand on this planet, look out and know that there is more out there, and have some idea of what's out there and be going out there to explore. So for me, there's some magic in that, and I hope I can kind of instill that magic of life in my son. And so I don't want to say I want him to have a happy life, because yes, I do want him to have a happy life, but you can never be happy all the time. But I hope he can live a peaceful life and a content life, knowing that he is secure in himself and in being loved and being encouraged to flourish into whatever human being he is meant to be. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I hope it was helpful to any of you potentially considering going on this journey yourself, maybe deciding if solo parenthood is right for you. Like I shared throughout the video, this was very much a process for me of working through ideas of like what I wanted my family life to look like and how I felt comfortable with things happening and everything. And this is just the path that I chose to take and how it felt right for me. It might be slightly different for you, and that's okay, but figuring out how you feel about things, or at least considering it as an option, is often a first step on this journey. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Do please subscribe, and I will see you very soon. Bye everyone, have a great day.